we have a number of information reports. First of all, we'll go to item 3.1, state and federal update.
President Baca, members of the board, and Chancellor Harris, here to present the information update for the state item as well as the federal item. In the board agenda, it starts on page 27. What I'll try to do for efficiency is basically supplement what's in there, but if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Today is the day the legislature reconvenes, although since our board item was put in, there's a number of things that they've been doing. They're looking towards the January 25th Legislative Council date. And I mentioned that date because that's when up to that point, we start hearing a lot from members and their staff about bill ideas. And they'll put in legislation that may not be fully cooked to meet that deadline. And sometimes what we'll see is an idea or a skeleton, and they'll try to get some additional information. As you see in the board item, a few bills were introduced when they swore in December, and since then a couple more. One in particular that made a fair amount of news is AB 51 by Assemblymember Logue on a baccalaureate pilot program. As you've probably no doubt read, this one is to be a model for articulation to limit the cost of a baccalaureate degree to $10,000, including textbooks. In the bill, he designated CSU Chico to work with Yuba, Butte, and the county offices of education in that area. I've reached out to some of the folks in those areas, and they had not known that the bill was coming. CSU Long Beach is also listed as a pilot, and Long Beach City College is connected, as well as the Long Beach County Office of Education. So the three segments are his target audience. Again, from the contacts that I have, it was news to them. CSU Stanislaus with San Joaquin Delta and the San Joaquin County Office of Education are also included in that potential bill. Actually, it is a bill, but there's probably more to it as we move forward. As far as new bills, on the Senate side, Senator Corbett introduced a bill, SCA 9, for special taxes for community and economic development projects by local governments from 2/3 to 55%. That's new in your item, but I also want to point out that Senator Leno is authoring a state constitutional amendment proposal to reduce the parcel tax approval rate to 55%. And the reason I mention that is later in your agenda item, you'll notice that one of our districts failed to pass their parcel tax by less than 0.5%. They got 66.16% of the vote. So if it were to be lowered, we might have more potential bills in that area. A few things I wanted to mention is that as we move forward in January and on to February, when the bills are supposed to be introduced, we will hear a lot more of what folks are interested. President Baca mentioned a couple of ideas, but some of the rumors we are hearing involve career technical education, nursing, perhaps a nursing bachelor's degree in our system, and there has been some regulations floated as changes for credit by exam, using our Title V regulations and putting into statute. That's really not appropriate, but just so you know, there's a lot of interest out there in what our system is doing. Since the item I had mentioned in the write-up that the President Pro Tem had identified his rules membership, which was the Senator Steinberg, Senator Jean Fuller, Senator Emerson, Hannah-Beth Jackson, who at one point when she was in the Assembly authored a nursing minimum qualifications bill for our system. and Ricardo Lara. And I mention this because Senator De Leon at the time was still on still on rules, but he's now the chair of Senate Appropriations. Ricardo Lara replaced him. As we know, Senator Carol Liu was named chair of Senate Education. And one thing I want to mention there is, as President Baca mentioned with adult education, when she was an assembly member, she did author a bill to reform all of adult education. It became a small study bill, but she definitely has an interest in that area. Senator Mark Leno was designated chair of the budget, and Senator Marty Block, who was the chair of Assembly Higher Ed, is chair of the subcommittee on the budget. In the Assembly, there weren't any changes to the top positions, but all the committee assignments have now been filled. The Higher Ed Committee has increased in size significantly, while the Assembly Ed Committee has decreased in size. We have members, Rocky Chavez is the vice chair of the committee. He was at the Department of Veterans Affairs with the chair, Doss Williams, who's also was named in at the end of August. On the committee includes, excuse me, I was gonna mention something there, but, one thing I wanna mention with the interest in higher ed is that the Veterans Committee Chair, Alan Murtzaki, he was very interested in participating on the Assembly Higher Ed Committee. Rocky Chavez also on, and Steve Fox are also on the Veterans, Higher Ed, and Budget Committee. Okay, let's see. At this point, I think we can move on to the federal report unless there are questions about specific legislation.
Yes, Member McDougal?
Yeah, Mike, I did not understand on page 28 what SCA Hernandez, exactly what is being sought
Right.
through this initiative. Could you clarify what that is?
Let me pull out the bill. It's, Senator Hernandez on a couple of occasions has tried to look at revising the ability for UC and CSU to reach out to minority groups. And in his Senate constitutional amendment proposal, what he suggests is that we allow the higher education systems to recruit to those groups that are protected by the 14th Amendment. So I would assume, based on my reading of this, is that he's still interested in increasing the diversity of the UC and CSU departments, or excuse me, institutions.
So somehow there might be state funds appropriated through the referendum process to do a more assertive recruitment?
That's
is
not
that-
in the proposal. The proposal would basically change the Proposition 209 sections of the state constitution.
Okay, I guess I,
It's not the most simple proposed legislation, but I can share it with you if you'd like.
Vice President Moss?
Do we have any, at this point, are we planning to sponsor or support any specific legislation as a system?
At this point, we are not.
And then, what will be with all the new faces in the Capitol, what will be the most effective way for us to kind of make the case to the legislature? Do we have some legislative days planned and things like that?
Yes, we do. We do have an advocacy day that we normally plan, that we are planning to have to coincide with the March Board of Governors meeting. At about the same time, our faculty groups and student groups are also planning to advocate themselves. Later this month, the League has its own advocacy event in the Capitol. But we do, on a regular basis, try to meet with members of the legislature, and we certainly are open to additional meetings. They're just filling out some of their key positions. The Senate has yet to fill out the committee membership, but we do start to seek out at this point the key members of the legislature and all the members of the legislature that are interested in helping our system. I think one of the most important areas we need to look at are getting as close a relationship as possible, include the administration itself as well as the Department of Finance. They have a significant effect on our system.
And then going back to the legislation, have we introduced or advocated for all the pieces of legislation that could be possible through the Student Success Task Force recommendations? There's the one governance one that are we setting aside for now, but are there other pieces that require legislative remedies that we need to pursue?
Not that we've identified so far, and those who more closely working on that might be able to add to that. But there were only a couple of areas that were identified. The one on the governance, if we do want a more significant and authoritative chancellor's office with the abilities for the chancellor to appoint vice chancellors, that would actually be another level, I would think, beyond legislation. That would involve potentially a constitutional amendment as well.
I see.
But there's a lot to be implemented in the Student Success Task Force through regulations as well as procedures.
I was just, because I was so pleased we're so successful in getting through the Lowenthal bill last year too. So.
Member McDougall.
Yes, I'd just like to pick up on Board Member Baum's comment and reinforce the importance of that comment, that I would hope at the board retreat, one of the areas of attention would be the legislative agenda that this board would want to consider advancing. And obviously the Student Success Task Force would be a major component of that. But certainly we have to react to legislation that comes to us. But I think more significant than reacting is leading in terms of legislation. And I think the timing of the retreat provides an ideal opportunity to work with our chancellor and come up with what we feel is a package that will support the system to the maximum degree. Otherwise, I mean, obviously there'll be budgetary considerations, but there will be the task force and other areas that we need to, if you will, set the template for rather than react to a template that is set for us. So I would like to urge follow-up on that.
Chancellor Harris, do you have any?
Well, I certainly concur. I think that the implementation of the Student Success Task Force recommendations are likely to include some other legislative aspects. It's just it's a bit premature to know exactly what those are going to be. I do think we're going to spend a lot of our legislative time in the coming months dealing with fiscal related issues. And I suspect in light of what the governor comes forward with later in the week, that we'll see some focus on workforce development. So I think there is likely to be, especially leading up to the May revise, some offensive activity on the part of the board and the chancellor's office.
Any other comments? Member
Just briefly, not to push on this too long, but as the chancellor mentioned, the area of career development, career technical education is an area where the state is going to be more dependent on the community college to deliver the goods than it is any segment that exists. And we need to be able to define what support is necessary to do that and what programmatic changes and perhaps even legislative changes might be required to enable the system to have the flexibility to move ahead in this area. So I think that should be a high area of emphasis.
Very true. Thank you. Any other comments, Chancellor Harris? Did you have something? Vice Chancellor McGee, did you have anything else to add?
Also on the federal report.
Federal? Go.
The federal report is something that we had to walk in. It should be handed out to you at your desk. Part of the reason for that, obviously, is because of what was going on in the Capitol in D.C. As we mentioned in November, quite a few members of Congress from California were former state legislators, and there is one, Mark Nakano, who was a community college trustee. So those are folks that we'd like to get to know and that we know pretty well from their work here in the state capitol. But as members of Congress, hopefully they'll be helpful to us and remember our system as they move forward. As you've heard in the news, no doubt the fiscal cliffs tax provisions were extended for a time, and that's discussed right there in the federal report. However, they didn't address the spending cuts, and obviously that is what we're all going to hear about soon. The potential for the sequestration cuts to go through, as well as whether or not they lift the debt ceiling, could affect our system significantly. In addition, the ongoing continuing budget resolution that they use to maintain spending, that expires at the end of March, and so we're definitely concerned about what may happen there in the federal government. There were a couple of items that were passed, as is mentioned in our report. The student loans, U.S. Department of Education has a pay-as-you-earn provision to enable you to pay or back on your student loans based on your income. And the Department of Defense released their tuition assistance memo, which has to do with members of the military, the active duty military, taking courses in their off-duty time. They receive some support from the Department of Defense, and they've extended that memo. And as we go forward, there's definitely a lot more for us to learn about and to pay attention to at the federal level. We do have the trustee visit coming up in Washington, D.C. The state of California has limited our travel to attend that, but those of us that are able to, will make sure we make our case there in the capitals, in the state, federal capital as much as possible. We are organizing and trying to make as many appointments as we can at this point. With the timing of the members and the election, it's just now getting started, but we have worked closely with the league in organizing the breakfast and the afternoon event. As you know, the conference starts on February the 12th through the 14th. In the afternoon of Tuesday, there's a briefing. We do have a speaker that we're tentatively secure will attend, and we also have the breakfast meeting that we're planning to include a member of the press with appointments to follow on that day. Are there any questions about the federal part?
No questions? Okay, well, look forward to the Washington visit. The League of Scott Lay and your office do a good job of organizing those visits, and it's good to have a lot of our friends move on to Congress and work with us on the various issues affecting the community colleges. Thank you.
Thank you.